You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
We're back for another episode of the 21.5 Show. Max and Dylan.
Ahoy there. It's the podcast for professional pilots by two professional pilots. My name is Dylan. I represent all of the great pilots in business aviation.
And my name is Max. I represent pilots from both groups.
Oh.
Yeah.
I represent some of the not great pilots in business aviation.
Dylan, have you heard about this revolution in pilot training that's currently happening right under our noses?
No, but I need some.
A well-known personality on this show has decided to take things serious and talk about...
Let it slide up off the ground. We in ground effect, baby. We in ground effect. Just ride that
Donovan
thing.
Batiste, our boy.
Donovan?
Soft feel, baby. Soft feel. We in that thing. We in that thing.
Who else do you want to teach you about aviation?
No,
I mean, at least it will be entertaining, right?
Of course.
So I was just asking Dylan about like a Donovan Batiste update. Unfortunately, he wouldn't respond to our request to come on the show. So I guess
Still working on that.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. Maybe he'll come now that he has an axe to grind. But this is just a snippet from one of his training videos on ATIS, AWOS, and ASOS. What's the difference?
Boom! What's the difference between ATIS, ASOS, AWOS, A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Let's talk about that thing. Hey, bro! When you're checking the weather, there are a variety of different weather reporting systems that you may run across throughout your aviation journey. And oftentimes, you're not really concerned with what the weather reporting system is. You just want to understand what the weather is, because that's going to help you aviate, navigate, and communicate.
Oh my gosh, this is so great. I love this, though. He's creating videos on YouTube, just short 5-minute videos, breaking stuff down for student pilots. I love it.
It's incredible.
I'll have a link to his YouTube feed.
Guys, if anyone needs a refresher on anything, feel free. Donovan Batiste keeping it interesting.
So next time the captain asks for the ATIS, you're just going to go,
Boom! What's the difference between ATIS, ASOS?
We need to get that sound drop on our board here.
next time you're flying, and yeah, you guys probably don't ever fly into a airport that has like AWOS or ASOS at the airlines, do you? I would imagine probably not. Yeah.
We're pretty upset if we have to listen to the ATIS generally.
Oh, that's right. Anyway, so that was incredible. Shout out Donovan Batiste. We got to get him on the show still. Max, welcome back. It's time for another episode. We're going to continue the conversation on pilot mental health with the hosts of the Pilots Pandemic podcast. This has been a brutal summer, especially for most of our friends at the airlines, especially like flying narrow body stuff. Like it has been a grind. Do you feel like the end is in sight? Does it seem like things are backing off?
Oh, yeah. Well, things have even gotten better, even running through the gauntlet this summer, because as other work groups have become better staffed faster than the pilots. So just the support end, like waiting for somebody to marshal you in or somebody to drive the jet bridge over, all that was steadily getting better. And then now, especially at the airline I work for, you know, our schedule starts to reduce as you get to the end of summer. And so I fly the AMs generally, and they reduced the amount of pre-6 a.m. departures by 40% starting in September. So, which means we haven't had to start quite as early, which I certainly saw in my schedule. So
this is my favorite thing that happens to Max on reserve. Maybe you've mentioned this on the show before. For some reason, you keep getting this flight to Milwaukee. That like, what time does it take off?
It's 5 a.m. departure.
5 a.m. And every time I get a text, who's going to Milwaukee at 5 in the morning?
I know.
I love it. You should go back there and interview a few passengers. Be like, what's...
I know why. It's probably cheap. That's why. I mean, I don't know if that one's still around. But anyway, I'm off reserve now. So
congratulations.
I don't have those problems. We'll be flying that 5 a.m. to Milwaukee that everybody drops or trades away.
Sure you will. That's all you're going to be able to... You're going to hold a line.
I'll
but
hold
it's
that
gonna,
every week. It'll be every week now.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to hear from some of our listeners in the airline and the business aviation side. Have things starting to slow down for you a little bit? Have you gotten through the summer? Can you see light at the end of the tunnel? I hope so, because I know for a lot of people that was pretty brutal. One last thing to mention, Max. In the last episode, we mentioned that networking happy hour that we ended up having here in Scottsdale, and that was last night. And we had a few listeners come out. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome.
We had a great networking session with a lot of local pilots. I met a bunch of pilots that lived in Phoenix I'd never met before. And it's great. It's tough. You got to step outside your comfort zone a little bit. You know, a lot of pilots are type A. Maybe they're a 1 on the Enneagram. Being in a room full of people that they don't know isn't exactly their idea of a good time. But
which, if you're that person, all the more reason to go, I think.
Absolutely.
And the thing is, you got to get a little weird and walk up to somebody and just like say, hey, my name's Max.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah.
And after that, it's pretty easy. It's kind of like talking to a hot girl at the bar. You just got to get up and say hi. And then after that, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Not in my experience. They're the ones that get up and leave usually.
If they say hi, I got to go see my friend.
Got to call her. But yeah, it was great. So thanks to all the listeners that came out, got outside their comfort zone. And you never know how those connections that you made at those kind of events could benefit you going forward. So salute to you. Let's talk about those hats that we've got for sale, Max.
I was sporting one last night.
I know. I appreciated that. I was wearing the old school one. And
yours is the bottom of the lake in Canada.
That's
as
exactly
previously
right.
discussed.
You can get your own hat, which you can do whatever you want with it. You could wake foil in it if you'd like.
No, you can't because you have to wear a helmet.
You can wake foil.
That
That's right.
foil will whack you in the head.
That's right. Another reason to stick with the airfoil. Anyways, $55 on the website. You can make a donation. We'll send you a hat. There's gray and camo still available. Got a few left.
Not for long.
Yeah, exactly. I'm shipping out 2 more today. 215podcast.com. Any reviews, Max?
Yes, insightful. Max and Dylan show a deep perspective and understanding of all facets of the industry. Mm-hmm. And on the rare occasions they don't, they interview people that do. I often tell people that I don't want to talk about flying on my days off. This podcast is the exception to the rule.
I feel like most pilots want to talk about flying on their time off, and then when they're flying, they want to talk about something else. Haven't you kind of found that is the experience?
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Especially at the airlines. I don't know. You don't want to talk about flying there when they're at the hotel.
Christian, the guy I fly with on the corporate side, we were flying back. It's kind of a long flight the other day. And we're sitting there, and we're both, as well as Dylan, we are into watching Formula One racing.
Yeah.
Right? So we were in the cockpit. We were dying laughing so hard because we were playing a game because this was like 2.5 hours in this flight. And we were it was imitating somebody in Formula One, and then the other one had to guess who.
Oh, just drivers?
No, anybody. No, Michael. Who's that? I mean, that's obvious, right?
Toto Wolff.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's got to be.
But we were getting down to like,
You're going down
Gunther Steiner and,
Martin Brundle, maybe. Well, that actually reminds me of a show that I want to do. So as we've become big fans of Formula One, I start to wonder more and more about the logistics of it because, I mean, it's truly a worldwide sport, right?
Yeah.
I know, like, I've heard about the NASCAR Air Force and some of that stuff. Well, this is a good
one right now. They were just in Italy on Sunday. Yeah. The race next Sunday is in Singapore.
Yeah.
Like, dude, the Cardinals have a 777, which I thought was pretty impressive, but we're moving cars and, like, all of this gear, spare motors, I mean, everything. It's insane.
So I know there's the NASCAR Air Force, and they have their own deal, and I know they use CRJs and maybe Saabs. I want to know about the aviation side of Formula One, and I know nothing about it, and I haven't really been able to figure much about it. Maybe one of our listeners knows how it works. Yeah, I think like the drivers and stuff, the teams maybe have some regular business jets to move people. I think I've seen a lot of Falcons, but like I'm talking about the actual like cars and the team and
that's what I want to know. I know all the guys. Yeah, you can look and see what.
So if anyone's got some insight, and hey, maybe if you flew even in the NASCAR Air Force, I'd be curious to hear just about like in general racing team logistics. How does that work? So if you got some experience, we'd love to hear from you. info@215podcast.com. Speaking of that email address, why don't we just get into the mailbag? Well, the people that already sent us an email.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the mailbag, of course, as you know, is brought to you by our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy, aircrewacademy.com. You can check out all of their offerings for educational topics.
There's a very exciting episode in the works with
Go ahead and promote it.
Yeah. Experts. So I was doing my distance learning module the other day for my airline job, and it was on cold weather operations and de-icing and anti-icing and holdover times and this, that, and all that stuff to kind of refresh your memory. And then we have cards in the cockpit that we can reference, and we have an app for the holdover time.
Right.
So my point is that I was watching it, and I'm like, oh, yeah, it's kind of a refresher for all that. And then I'm like, God, they make this so easy at the airlines. And then on the corporate level, charter, you still have an education requirement and all of that. And I was like, wow, a lot of 91 people, this is not very much on their radar until all of a sudden it's your whole day trying to figure out all this stuff. And your airplane's been sitting on the ramp for New Year's in Aspen, and it's got a ton of snow, but now it's snowing for departure, and you have to figure out what kind of de-icing and anti-icing, and each airplane has its own things for running the engine at a certain RPM, given conditions to shed ice from the fan or what, all kinds of stuff. And so we approached our friends at Aircrew Academy, and of course they have a subject matter expert that's written the course on this and knows way more than we do on the subject. And so
No, that review said we're experts on all facets of the industry.
This is one of the rare occasions we don't. We're going to interview someone that is.
Perfect.
So we got that in the works. That'll be a good impetus for everybody, especially the Part 91 guys, to dig into the book and
I have some thoughts on that.
reorient yourself. So
Yeah, we'll save that. Okay, cool. Email number 1 comes from Justin. He says, hey guys, the Pan Am Foundation has a very good podcast that you can find in Apple Podcasts. They've interviewed a couple of guys that went from the flying boats to the 747. Highly recommend. Also, check out the book Sky Gods by Bob Gant, a good fictionalized account of a Pan Am pilot hired in the late 60s. Have you read that one yet?
No.
Okay, I'm going to.
Yeah, I will.
This is in response to your question in your last episode about how you were like, man, what's it like for these guys to go from a flying boat to the 747 in the span of their career?
Yeah, that's a big transition.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Okay, next email. Go ahead.
I was one of those people that got fired from their corporate job when I gave my notice. Had a class date for an ACMI about 6 weeks out. Wanted to give my employer plenty of notice because I was due for recurrent, and it was a 2-person flight department. Gave notice Tuesday, was fired Friday. Never even started at the ACMI because the Legacy hired me before my class date. Spent the time waiting for class by doing contract flying and made more money than had I stayed employed. Funny how things work out, Mark. I stand corrected. Because I said on the last episode that people were always afraid of this. I'm like, everybody's afraid of this, but have you ever heard of anybody who's gotten fired when they gave notice? I haven't. Well, now we have.
There you go. But it's one of those situations I feel like I've heard before, like, oh, I got fired, but it ended up working out better for me.
Well, that's how it is in my career, too. Like, I've been laid off twice from people that sold airplanes out from under me, and it always ended up working out pretty good.
Yeah.
So,
and you try to do the right thing there, and give them plenty of notice.
Yeah, that's a tough one to walk. And I think that we should reply to this because the question I have is, was he completely blindsided by this, or did he think, based on the personality of the people he worked for, that this may be coming down the pipe? That's what because I feel like you kind of know the people that have massive ego or something like that, where they're going to take it very personally. Why, you quit with me?
The other thing I think that's really interesting too is that for people in business aviation, especially if you're in touch with what's going on in the training market right now, the backup to get into training can be so long on certain airframes that some of that, I'll just fire you and get another guy. Well, it might not be as easy as that right now. So that might be a little bit of a insulation for you. Now that'll probably change in the next coming months as, the hiring ramps up and everything else, but just another factor to consider. Plus, if you do end up getting fired and you have currency left, like what Mark is saying, you're not gonna have any problem contract flying.
Right now.
Very interesting. Okay, next email says, hey, Max and Dylan, big fan of the show. Hope you can shed some light on a couple of questions. I'm a 40-year-old, 650-hour CFI, currently in 2 regional cadet programs with SkyWest and Republic. Would be excited to be at either, but they seem to be the only 2 regionals not dumping money into the laps of new hires. What is your take on this? Is this a red flag for Republic or SkyWest? I don't want to hitch my wagon to a Compass Trans-States ExpressJet situation. By my count, it's now Piedmont, Envoy, PSA, Horizon, and now Mesa with the rich contracts. A follow-up to this question is the amount of raise that's been given seems nuts. First-year FO wages are almost doubling. How is this possible? Next question is off topic, but would love to hear this brought up on an episode or an interview. I have dual citizenship, and I'm interested in possibly eventually planting roots in Europe. I know I would need to be EASA certified to fly there, but what all is involved in the process if I'm ATP rated here in the U.S.? Any tips or tricks or advice for someone that's made the jump? That would be amazing. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Love the podcast, and that's from Nicholas.
Well, in the rapidly changing market of regional airlines, he mentioned SkyWest as not being on the train, where, well, I think now they're on the train of the big raises.
The money train.
The money train. The retention money train.
So, Nicholas, if you've listened to this show before, you know that as quickly as, these raises come, they can also disappear. I would focus less on the money and more on the strategy of what you're trying to do next, right? So if the captain upgrade is much quicker at an airline that maybe doesn't have the massive pay, and your goal is to get to a different job than that regional carrier, that might be worth it. Money is just one of the factors that you've got to look at. Hopefully, you don't have to stay at a regional too long unless you want to. But the reality of the matter is that it is entirely possible that things could change in our job climate at a moment's notice. So make sure you've got a comfortable seat, because if you just chase the dollars and then things change, you could be stuck somewhere for several years. And
Well, the other thing too is don't go buy a new house and a boat that you finance with all that monthly income, because all of those regionals too have snapbacks in a few years. So.
Exactly. You know, as you mentioned, the SkyWest pay rate did go up, but they all have snapbacks in it, right?
Yeah.
So they know. And to your point of like, how can everyone afford to pay these people? Well, my guess is the regional airlines don't think they're going to be paying first year FOs $100 an hour
forever,
if in perpetuity. Like, this is a short-term thing.
Right.
That'd be my guess. Supply and demand.
The next question he brought about getting your EASA stuff, I don't know much about that.
I'd love to hear from a listener on that one. Don't know anything about that either. I accept that. From what I understand, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's
Pretty
not
challenging.
like one written
It's not like it
test.
transfers right over. Like,
Yeah, it's expensive. But this is just a guess. There are probably companies that are willing to sponsor that. If you're dual citizen already, you might be able to
that's a
get
good
somebody
point.
to foot the bill. Love to hear from listeners that have more insight than us on that topic. See, we're not industry experts on everything. Okay, Max, go ahead with the last email.
As always, it's great listening to your show. I have a gear question and gear review. Coffee. I've been wondering lately about coffee solutions when on the road. I cannot stand the lines in the passenger terminal restaurants. Hotel coffee and airplane coffee isn't cutting it. I usually start the day too early for anything outside of the airport to be open. Plus, it's logistically difficult. I recall Max talking about making his own coffee. Obviously, space is limited. Thoughts? All right. He has other things. I'm just going to tackle this one right now because I've mentioned this before in the show, but I am the same way. I can handle getting up early and doing all this stuff. And I feel like if I have a good, solid cup of coffee, then it's all very tolerable for me in the airline gig. So I'm the same way. I'm not waiting in Starbucks for 20 minutes in the airport for a mediocre cup of coffee. The stuff in the hotel room is terrible, and the airplane is oftentimes worse. So what I've done is I grind coffee at home. And you can really get aggressive and have like a hand grinder and grind your own beans on the road. I don't take it to that level, but I do grind coffee the night before at home with beans that I get from a place here in town, but it's called Passport Coffee. You can order it online. Actually, I order it now because it just comes every once in a while, and it's great.
Shout out.
So
yeah.
I have that. I grind the coffee before I go to work, and I just have it in a little Ziploc bag, and then I have this device called a Kappa Mocha pour-over coffee maker. And all it is, it's a very simple device. It's on Amazon. We'll put the link in the show notes. It's $35, and it is a cup, and on the top screws a thing that holds a paper filter that you buy that goes with it, and you put the coffee in the paper filter, and then you pour the coffee over it. So the only thing you need to get is hot water. And I have two sources of hot water. I make it in my room a lot of times before I go to the airport. And so everybody has a coffee maker in the room. So a lot of times I'll just run the coffee maker with water just through it to heat it up.
Isn't that where a lot of people wash their socks in there, though?
Well, most of them are now the single-use
Oh, that's right.
cup stuff now. So you just kind of close it without a cup and then put a cup in there. Or on the airplane, there's a hot water dispenser on the coffee machine. Obviously, an important element of coffee is having good water.
Yes.
And so you can take the water you bring to the overnighter. It's not 100% perfect, but it's the best that I'm doing with the minimal amount of effort and time. And so I do that. I make a cup before I leave to go to the airport. And then sometimes I'll make a second one
Okay.
on the turn. So
That's legit.
yeah.
So obviously not the airlines, but for me, I love something called the AeroPress. So you have the pour over option, right? So that's basically grounds in the thing, and you just pour hot water over it and kind of gravity drips down. The AeroPress is something where you're actually pressing a plunger down and forcing the water over the grounds. Have you ever had it?
Yeah. You've made it
Yeah,
before.
I have it at home. I use it at home. They have a travel kit. I have not used it, but even the regular AeroPress you could take with you. Same thing. Grind your beans beforehand, and so it kind of depends on how you'd want to do it. I love the AeroPress. I think the best coffee I've ever made is coming through an AeroPress. I make it like an Americano, so you basically like shoot out a shot and then put more hot water in there. So a couple different options, but I would say you got to control your own destiny.
Yeah, and you got to do a little bit of research
Yeah.
on like that, because if you grind it too fine, it won't really pour through. So you have to
Yeah.
have the right size. And there's something called blooming where you
Yeah.
pour it over and let it sit for a minute. And then you
It's a whole
pour the
deal.
rest. It's-
But that's kind of the art. Though that's kind of fun, though, right? In a way, like it's a thing you do. It's a ritual, would you say? Or is it like, for you, is it like you wake up, you're like, I got to get this coffee made as quickly as I can.
no,
Get the van.
it's
like,
part of like my deal. Like
Yeah.
I wake up and then I'll like pour the water into the machine, and then sometimes I'll do it the night before, and then I just hit the button and whatever. It's the little things to enhance your experience at work that make it all. I was explaining to someone last night to make the job from like tolerable to pleasant.
Yeah.
It takes very little. It's a little bit of a mindset I've talked about,
preparation.
like not worrying about a bunch of stuff you can't control, having a couple things that just enhance your life a little bit at work, and then it's darn right pleasant.
Exactly. Okay. Point number 2.
He's luggage. When I was an FO flying Part 135, I loaded the bags all the time. I can't stand a heavy bag. I don't want a bag that's heavy before I even put anything in it. I ended up with a Travel Pro Flight Crew 5. This one, we are working on an episode, another gear review. I have the Luggage Works bag that I got because everybody else had it. I think like everybody else who buys that bag, and it is miserable and heavy and will destroy things. It's terrible. So I'm in the market for a new bag, so we're going to do a big review. And
we'll see if we can get this Travel Pro Flight Crew 5. I'm just saying, back when I was at the airlines, Travel Pros were for flight attendants. I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't know if that's still the case. I've been out of that game for a while.
Plenty of.
Have you seen a lot of people?
Travel
Okay.
Pros, yeah.
All right.
Well, look, the good. It has a commercial use warranty. It has the 2 rollerblade style wheels, and all the parts can be replaced with a Phillips screwdriver.
Perfect.
It is one of the less expensive options out there, and has worked fine for me on charter and 121. Fits just fine in the 737. The bad, and I'm an idiot and forget to remove the J-hook when I checked it one time. It got ripped off and broke the clip for the attachment. Travel Pro did send him a new clip and replaced it with a screwdriver. They did not have the J-hook in stock, so they sent me a strap with the same clip and buckle, which cracked in cold weather on the ramp in Bozeman, Montana one winter. I just use a regular strap now and don't even use the clip. Maybe I'll find a J-hook someday. So overall, if someone's looking for a less expensive option, $200 range, the Travel Pro Flight Crew 5 is a good buy. Of course, if any of the baller regional pilots want to splurge on luggage, I'm sure there are better options out there.
$200 though. That's pretty good. Another email about bags. They said, I suggest a flight bag review, not just for the 121 guys, some options for us corporate guys, like the eBags Pro Slim or the Timbuktu. They have a couple of options.
Do you
out there.
carry a flight bag? Corporate?
No, I just do backpack.
That's what I do too.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think he means rollaboard, I think is what he's referring to.
Oh.
Anyways, that email was from Mark. And then the longer email asking about the coffee, I forgot to say his name. That was from Mike. So great emails, fellas. Really appreciate that. I think this luggage review, we're going to time this so then it'll be before the holidays. Who doesn't want to get a nice suitcase for their birthday?
at least to pour over coffee.
Exactly.
Setup.
What an incredible gift for the pilot in your life. That's going to do it for the mailbag, brought to you by our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy. If you've got something you want to send into the mailbag, shoot us an email, info@215podcast.com. Coming up next, Max, flight advice.
Right.
Of course, brought to you by Harvey Watt, the largest offerer of loss of medical insurance. We're going to talk a lot about that in the interview coming up. But you can go to harveywatt.com, see all their offerings for professional pilots, not just loss of medical insurance. Life insurance is out there, almost no restrictions for professional pilots. Check it out, harveywatt.com. All right, on to flight advice. No Diamond Dog today, but here we go. It's time.
There's no Diamond Dog.
I know, there was. I got all excited. All right. Looking for some advice from 2 experienced Diamond Dogs, regional FO on the commuting grind. I have an upcoming interview with FlexJet, thanks to your podcast with Jim Dunn, which was very informative. Yes, Max, no need to stress when there isn't a decision to be made, since I have to pass the interview first, but I'd like to have my head on straight before then. I've always been dead set on the airlines, and I've really enjoyed the job and lifestyle so far, but the idea of not checking the standby list every 20 minutes is very enticing. Still a chance the major in my city might call, not to mention first-year pay at FlexJet is ridiculous, and everyone I've been able to connect with there has nothing but good things to say about the job. My 2 biggest struggles with the decision is how different the flying is. I'm not a lazy person, but hard to beat a one-and-done on a 4-day. Second concern is my current situation. We don't know if we'll stay where we are or move to base next year. So many what ifs. I know at the end of the day, I need to figure out what exactly is most important to me, but any thoughts on the situation are greatly appreciated. Thanks and keep up the awesome work. And that is sent by our anonymous form, which is on our website. So we don't even know who this is.
So the question is, should you go to FlexJet to avoid commuting? But apparently he does live in a city that has a major airline that has a domicile there.
Right.
But then he's also considering moving to a base that his current airline has. Is that what you're feeling?
That's what I understand.
Well, I would take the gig with Flex if you've gotten the experience you need to get from your current airline, which I'm assuming is a regional at this point,
Right.
Making that assumption, if you've gotten the experience that you think you need from that airline and you're looking for a quality of life enhancement, I don't know why you wouldn't go to FlexJet. And it might be good because you can go there and you can fly for a while. And then if the major you want to go to that has a domicile in the city you want to live in long term calls, well, then you have another decision to make. And at least you've gone to Flex and you figured out if you like that. And maybe you'll say, hey, I'm not interested in flying for the major airline anymore. I live where I want to live. I like the flying. And I think a lot of times too, I've never flown for fractional, but I know a lot of times your last day ends up being your airline flight to get you home. So I'm sure there's exceptions to that, and they might have you work a little bit, but a lot of times I know from our friend at NetJets, I remember here, the first day and last day is mostly positioning days.
Right. I 100% agree. I think this really comes down to what experience you have at the regional. We had one listener who wrote in that said, I have like 1,500 hours and I'm going to go to NetJets. It's like, maybe you haven't flown enough at your regional to go. So do you have probably, I would say, at least 500 hours of 121? Probably.
Yeah, it's crazy because what we would have said before is at least have some turbine PIC, right?
Yeah.
1,000 hours. I don't think that's necessary anymore, and those requirements are not there.
Probably 1,121 hours would probably not be the worst. So assuming you're pretty close to that, keep in mind, I'm not going to say lateral, but any jump that you make is going to keep you out of the cockpit for several months while you're in training again.
Yeah, and the other thing too is I don't know for sure, but you would want to investigate, depending on where your total time's at and the rate at which you accrue flight time. Yeah. I'm sure is faster at the regional than it is even at Flex. But I could be wrong with that too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both.
I think you're both in that 700-800 hour range, depending on how much you want to work. I think you have a little bit more control at Flex on how much you want to work. But I like it because anytime you can expose yourself to a new type of experience and diversify your resume, I think that's a good thing. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And if you go to FlexJet, now you've got business aviation experience and a type rating on a relevant airplane going forward. And if things go south, that's only going to be another feather in your cap. Good luck. Let us know what happens. Anonymously, I guess. That's been the Harvey Watt flight advice segment. HarveyWatt.com to check out all of the coverages they provide.
I'd also like to invite our listeners, if we're ever totally off base and you think we are wrong, do not hesitate to reach out. We will read it. We're big enough men to admit when we're wrong. If
Definitely
we're called
big.
out, so
definitely large.
We don't want to ever give out the wrong info.
Absolutely. Okay, coming up to the main event, Max, we touched on the topic of fitness for duty, pilot mental health with Jenny Showalter a couple episodes ago. And we were in contact with Maddie and Emma. They are the co-hosts of a podcast called The Pilot's Pandemic, and it's a show that focuses most of their energy on this pilot mental health issue. And they're working on actually trying to get some reform. And so we thought that was an interesting topic. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Maddie and Emma and learn more about what can actually be done here to improve the situation in the aeromedical process with concerns to mental health. So hope you guys enjoy it. Max, we're so excited today to continue the conversation on pilot mental health. We have a co-host on co-host show for you today. There's 4 of us. Max and I are joined by Emma and Maddie. They are the co-creators and co-hosts of the Pilot's Pandemic podcast. It's a show that focuses on pilot mental health topics. Emma and Maddie, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm excited.
Let's hit the ground running. Can you tell us a little bit about your show? What's the story behind it? What drove you to create a podcast for such it is a hot topic in aviation right now. I think you're bringing voices to a lot of people in this segment. Tell us a little bit about how you got it started.
So I grew up in a very aviation-based family. My dad and my uncle were both airline captains for a large company. So I kind of grew up just very in the world of aviation. And the more and more I became aware of how my dad's job affected his day-to-day life, I noticed everything kind of wrapped around his medical. That seemed to be his number one priority, his number one concern. And it wasn't until his worst nightmare actually happened to him. He was pulled off the line. He pulled himself off and had to go down the SI pathway for some heart health issues. And this was just a huge awakening for my entire family. It made me think about my dad's job in a completely different light. at this point, I didn't have any aviation experience myself. So everything that I was learning was just kind of through the eyes of my dad. And June 30th, 2017, my dad passed away. We were in the process of getting the green light for him to go back to work. And it was super sudden, something that we just did not really expect to happen. All of his doctors were kind of like, yeah, you're ready to go, man. Like, let's get you back on the line. So after my dad died, I went to school for a little while and decided this isn't my jam. I want to fly planes. And I'd grown up flying a little bit with my dad in his J3 Cub. And so I always had like a little bit of a passion and love for it. But it wasn't until after my dad passed that I was really like inspired to follow in his footsteps. So I started flying at a small regional airport near me. And then as I started flying and learning more and more, obviously I became aware of the air medical process, what each medical means, etc. And then 11 months after my dad passed, and I'll just give you a little trigger warning, my uncle removed himself from the line and took his own life. And this was just a huge shock to my family. Mental health was something that we just honestly in our family, we didn't really talk about. I think because of the stigma that is so deep set. If you get help, if you talk about being sad, if you're scared, this, that, and the other, you could lose your medical, which is kind of the weird stigma that we all have in the back of our head as pilots. So when this happened to my family, obviously it completely took me off guard. So I started to do a little bit more research. And that's when I kind of started to realize that this problem was way bigger of a problem than I had previously noted. Like, it wasn't just my family who had experienced this. There were a lot of other people out there as well. So I started the petition, I think it was beginning of 2021, and it blew up. Like overnight, I had under 2,000 signatures, which for me was blowing up. I was just shocked by the amount of presence that I was getting through the petition on social media.
And for folks that don't know, what was the petition?
It is for air medical reform. So kind of throughout my research, I kind of got connected to a person named Dr. Billy Hoffman, who had done some research study on pilots. And basically, pilots are afraid of disclosing medical issues because they're afraid of the consequences. And through my research, I kind of started to realize what those certain consequences are. So when we wrote the petition out, we're kind of petitioning for those 3 pillars, which I know Maddie will probably get into talking about. But yeah, kind of just petitioning for air medical reform. People really want the ability to access healthcare without feeling like their job is going to be threatened.
So, Maddie, can you tell us a little bit about the current aeromedical system, the 3 pillars, and kind of what Emma's alluding to with some of the issues that pilots face?
Yeah, so the petition that Emma started has grown. So now we're at 12,000 signatures. And we get that question quite a bit. Like, what are you guys petitioning for? What do you want? And it's not so much that we've nailed down like exactly how we want aeromedical reform to happen, but we do have pillars that we utilize to say these are areas that the system isn't working. And how we came up with these pillars is talking to hundreds of pilots who have gone through the special issuance process. And every time, without a doubt, they will mention these 3 pillars that are causing them stress and that is not working for them. And those 3 pillars are going through the special issuance process. You're never guaranteed to get your medical back. It's always a may issue status. So you're basically in limbo that whole time, which can be very stressful for a pilot. You guys are always in control, and this is something you don't have any control over. And then the second part is that it takes a long time. So if you're doing a special issuance process for anything related to mental health, it will take up to 24 months for you to receive your medical back, which is insane. That's 2 years off the job. That basically means you'll probably go and get another career while you're waiting for your special issuance to come back. And then the cost is the 3rd pillar. So the cost of your special issuance can come out to about $10,000 plus. Kind of depends on how much they want to dig into your medical records and put you into different kinds of testing and stuff. But with the cost, the time, and then not knowing if you're going to get your medical back, those are the 3 main pillars that pilots always mention when we talk to them going through the special issuance process for their mental health problems or struggles.
And so when you're talking about just sort of what you laid out there, 24 months, maybe $10,000 out of your own pocket, is that for like I'm not sure what the right term is, but maybe like a quote unquote, like typical case of somebody that's maybe just struggling with some depression or something like that? Like, oh, and then maybe, hey, you're going to be prescribed a very typical depression medication?
Yeah, this can be just for like general anxiety disorder, or so the FAA likes to say, even if it's a typical case of depression, if it's small case of depression, which I don't really know what that means because they're very bad at explaining things. They're very convoluted in how they explain things. But I'll give you a recent story. Emma and I just talked to a student pilot who goes to Embry-Riddle, and he had disclosed that he had a case of depression when he was in high school, when he was 14 years old, and a suicide attempt on his life. And he was never diagnosed, ever. These are things that he disclosed that happened in high school, but he was never actually diagnosed with depression. And I don't know how many months he's into the process of the special issuance, but he said he's already spent about $4,000, $5,000 going through the process. And he also said when he went back to procure the records from his high school, that they're not even there anymore. So he disclosed something in good faith, but there's no record of it, yet he's still in the special issuance process, spending thousands of dollars to get a special issuance for a diagnosis he's never had. It is very typical, though. I will say, like, if you have depression, if you're going to go down a special issuance process for the SSRI pathway, it will take 24 months. And I think the fastest way to get through the special issuance process is to get your first class medical, because I know that second and third are not prioritized like first class medicals are.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Another interesting thing to add to Maddie's point, we've had a guest on our podcast who was prescribed one of the 4 approved SSRIs by the FAA. He still spent 24 months trying to get his medical back, and he had already held a first class medical. He had his PPO and I think his instrument rating at this point, and he was just having some anxiety issues, disclosed this, and still spent 24 months. And this was in the middle of his flight training. And this is someone's dream and goal to eventually be a CFI, work up their hours, and then go to the airlines.
Yeah, the reality of the matter is I think that more commonplace than people seeking a special issuance are the people that just have untreated problems that they won't seek treatment for because of this whole thing. And that's the real danger, I think. The FAA focuses on the people that self-disclose and are trying to seek treatment. It's the rest of the folks that are out there flying and refuse to seek treatment because they don't want to get wrapped up into this conundrum with the feds. And it's just insane.
Yeah. And we see a lot of pilots who are very senior who have worked these high position, high level jobs for quite a number of years. And they all are just so afraid, and they won't even use the pilot peer support programs. They just simply refuse, and they're removing themselves from the line and just taking their lives at home, which is the saddest part, because they've either been told that it's going to take this long, or they're just afraid that they'll never, ever fly again.
Is that what happened with your uncle, where he was just untreated stuff that he was afraid to seek treatment for?
Yeah, so it was kind of actually a combination of things. And this is why my uncle's case is kind of interesting. So my dad having heart health issues, and that's something that all my uncles were very aware of because they had lost their father to it at a very young age. So I think they were both very, very keen to this. That's why they lived their lives the way they lived. They were both hardcore athletes. But when my dad started having these issues, I think what I know is that my uncle eventually sought out some help because he was having some of the same symptoms my dad was. And I think his diagnosis was even more severe than what my dad was dealing with, because my dad just had some stents placed. He never had like an invasive open heart surgery. But the oldest of my uncles, their oldest brother, had just had open heart surgery after my dad had his stents put in. So I think what my uncle's fear was is I just watched my brother be removed from work, like all these terrible things happening to him, possibly never going to get his job back, and then just to pass away at the end of it. I think he thought this is kind of my only way out. And I definitely think had to have been some untreated depression there. And also just going back to childhood trauma. He lost his dad at a very young age and was having to provide and support his family at a very young age. So when you kind of start to connect the dots and make that puzzle a picture, you can really understand why some of these people are really suffering.
Yeah, you can certainly see that as like you're following your passion, you're in your career. It's got to be very hard when your dad lost his medical, and then for his brother to watch go through that and then think this could happen to me too. You know, you could certainly see where that would really place a mental tax on somebody who's already working in a very mentally challenging job. For any professional pilots, sleep is tough. We're in a lot of different time zones. We're gone from our families a lot. And so you already have all this stress baked in, and then you just add a couple more issues like that. And it's an incredibly challenging situation. And as you've mentioned, with this crazy timeline of how long it can take to get a special issuance, yeah, most pilots aren't going to try and seek help because of all of those factors. So certainly is a real issue.
Yeah, you'd have to think that the process is actually more dangerous than the medical conditions that people, because they just don't treat it and they're so afraid of it. And if they just made it like user friendly and realistic,
Approachable.
in the timelines and stuff, and didn't freak everybody out, like you said, reform. It's not just a simple fix here or there. It seems like the whole thing needs to be changed. So in your guys' awareness of this, what do you see as the best path to institute change here?
Well, there are a lot of different pathways. I think that's kind of what we're finding out is I literally just am like reaching out to anyone who is related to aeromedical reform in any way that we can. We've really targeted congressionally the House of Transportation and Infrastructure Board because they're the people who make the rules for the FAA. So if you want to go above the FAA's head, that's the way to do it. And I think that's about the only way to make change, honestly, because the FAA right now is in their spreading awareness campaign. And I think they've really been pushed to do that because if you go to the FAA's Instagram page and you look at the comments section, every single post will have something about mental health. And it's not nice. Emma and I have been on there commenting for years now. So I think they've gotten the clue from Gen Z and millennials that we want mental health reform. And so right now they're in that campaigning process. And they are trying to change things. I did just watch, they were at Oshkosh this year. They did a forum with the AOPA, and they were talking about some of the things that they want to change. But what I know about the FAA is like once they're pushed to make change, it takes years and years and years for them to actually implement that change. So that's why I want to go over their head and have someone force them to make those changes. So we have really targeted the House and Infrastructure Transportation Board, and there's an aviation subcommittee specifically who makes those rules. So that's one of the ways that we're doing it. And then the petition is like our endorsement. Like those are the voices that are saying, yes, we want reform. And that's why we want people to sign the petition, because we want that endorsement that, yes, aeromedical reform needs to happen. And then just networking, I'm setting up like a stakeholder group. And that's kind of what the congressional leaders want. They want a group of people who are invested in aeromedical reform, who have a background in it and can attest to the problems that the FAA is causing pilots to not say, I have problems. So those are kind of the things that we are targeting, but there's always more to be done.
So have you had anyone play, or maybe even the FAA themselves, sort of play I don't know if it's a devil's advocate, but basically they have to walk a fine line, right? Because they're worried about liability at some point, right? Because if you look at the other side of the coin and they say, look, if we had a pilot with a history of mental health issues and then something were to happen on an airplane and it crashed, even if it wasn't related, now we have a massive exposure. So has that been a part of the conversation? Is that part of the pushback? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would say that the opposite side of the coin is, okay, well, if you let someone fly that has these mental health struggles, something could happen. And yes, liability is huge. We talk about on the podcast all the time. FAA is only concerned about public perception and liability. But on the flip side of the coin is there are already people flying with mental health issues right now today.
Yeah.
And Emma had mentioned Billy Hoffman, who is a leading researcher for pilots and their healthcare seeking aversions. We're about to go down and witness one of his research projects here at the end of September. But he came out with his research, and it was 56% of pilots lie about their medical and their healthcare because they're afraid their medical is going to get taken. So if you already have 56% of pilots, and this is obviously based off of a small group of pilots, which is about 4,000, but it's the biggest study that's been done. Just think about that. When you fly, you're probably going to fly with someone who is struggling with their mental health, and they're flying just fine. They already hold a first-class medical. So what the FAA really is doing is just preventing them from getting the care that they need.
Yeah, which is what I was saying before. It's arguable what's protecting the public better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
For me, it's like the FAA is just kind of hiding. The elephant in the room is just like hiding back there. And it really is like you close the cockpit door and you don't know who's up there or what's happening. So I think it's easier for them to just say no than to kind of open the door to people who have anxiety and depression.
have you guys talked to any of the pilot unions about this? Because they all have aeromedical committees and then they have political action groups and a lot of muscle there. Have you guys talked to those?
Well, as you guys know, unions typically have their own agendas. And right now, almost everybody's union is in a contract negotiation.
Yeah.
So they don't give a shit right now. I think they will after all these negotiations happen.
Yeah.
But specifically for me, I've talked to my husband's union personally, and they were not happy with things that I was saying about the airline or what I thought they should be doing. And I have emailed both my local chapter and the head, the national board, and they've both been like, the FAA, they just kind of go around in a circle, and the email is always from a lawyer. So that kind of says something too.
It's one of these issues, like we mentioned, there are two sides to this coin, and there is no simple, unfortunately, solution. And so, like you said, much easier for the incumbents to kind of kick the can down the road.
Yeah, but you would think the unions would have, I mean, they're representing the people that this is affecting arguably the most, which is the professional pilots, which rely on their medical for their income versus a recreational pilot that it wouldn't affect that person certainly as much as a professional pilot. But you're right, though. I mean, when there's contract negotiations going on, that's nothing else really matters until that's done. And that takes a while.
If it was a pilot targeting the union, and that's the thing, it was me, and I'm not part of the union. My husband is. So they're like, they typically are like, have your husband tell us this. And obviously, no pilot is going to email in and be like, oh, I want mental health reform, because they're afraid it's going to come back on them.
Well, I mean,
in some way.
Look at what happens when you safety report. We all know that story about what happens when you safety report, which I don't want to say her name, but there was a pilot recently who brought up a safety concern. She had actually gone to Riddle for aviation safety. And when she brought it up, they basically formed a witch hunt after her and had her diagnosed with career-ending condition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and these are the reasons why people don't speak up is, again, to their union or people who are supposed to be there in their best interest, is because we've seen time and time again how they don't want anything bad, like anything that reflects them in a bad way. That's when the claws come out. So I think it's a very tricky road to really how to approach that with your company or your union rep.
Max, we're talking about all of the stressors that are on pilots, their job, their travel, they're away from their family, different time zones, trying to sleep, trying to figure out what type of coffee to pour. All of these things. The struggle is real. Let's remove some of the stress that you might have as a professional pilot when it comes to managing all of that massive amounts of money that you're making right now, even at the regional level. The best way to remove that stress is to bring in a professional to help you. You know who I'm talking about. It's certified financial planner Tim Pope. He helps professional pilots nationwide create and execute a smart financial strategy. Timothy P. Pope, your financial planning partner for all phases of your financial flight. Check the show notes for a link to book your free appointment with Tim. You can ask him if he's got any coffee recommendations as well.
I actually gave his info out to a captain I flew with trip before last.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was like, he's getting ready to retire and he's trying to figure out a whole bunch of stuff and what he's going to do, now that he's going to be no longer contributing to his retirement account and be drawing it down, and how to work with Social Security and when to take that and the whole thing. I'm like, dude, I don't know, but I know someone who does. So he actually called him and booked an appointment and stuff. I don't know how it went. We'll have to.
Oh, good. All these different financial folks, that's the one thing that I hear. The 401k especially, saving for it, that's the easy part, right? You just put it on your paycheck and it goes in there. The part you can screw up is this big transition here when you're getting ready to retire. That's when you can really make a catastrophic mistake.
Not even at the very end of the road. It's as you get, you have to change stuff incrementally as you get there. And
your portfolio.
That's what, again, do what you do well and let the other people do what they do well. Just like the captain, I had to have to talk with the guy. Tell me about standing on his block wall, trimming a ficus tree because it was so tall. I'm like, what? Are you serious right now? I'm like, you were And then he's like, yeah. I go, why don't you have landing? I can't find anybody. I fired the last one because they just weren't doing a good job. I finally said, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm like, how's that working out for you? And then he was telling me about the wall on the ficus tree, and he hired some young kid from church, but he wouldn't get up on the wall. I'm like, dude, that should have been your warning sign right there. Like,
Yeah.
he's smart. Like, you don't need to be up on the wall. You're a 50-something-year-old airline captain. Like,
But have you ever seen correctly pruned ficus tree? I mean, it's incredible.
It's worth the risk of your entire career.
I would say so.
Tacoing yourself on the top. And then when I asked him, I go, how's that working out for you? He goes, actually, I'll show you a picture of how that's working out. And it's this picture of his leg right above his knee and blood running all down his leg.
Gosh.
And he was using this new trimmers he got, and he popped himself right above the leg. And, pinched the skin and cut him. He's like, oh, I didn't even need stitches. I'm like, dude.
Oh, my gosh. Well, this ad read for Tim went off the rails a while ago, but listen, check the show
No,
notes.
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Don't trim your ficuses and don't make your own financial planning decisions. Pay people that are good at that, and you go do what you do. And if you need more money to cover it, go pick up a trip.
There you go. All right, back to the show. So the FAA had published a document 8500-8 and where they talked about the mandate to report visits to healthcare providers on your medical application, right? But then they had some clarification. They stated that visits to mental health professionals were reportable only if it was due to alcohol/substance abuse or resulted in a personal psychiatric diagnosis. So this interpretation I'm reading says, hey, if you have marital problems and you go to counseling, that doesn't have to be reported. And maybe there's other types of situations that fall into that category. Is that what you kind of have seen happening in actuality? Or can you talk a little bit about the different reporting requirements and how that's handled?
They're always updating what's required. It's really difficult, though, to know like what you report and what you don't, because every AME is different, and they will say, oh, you don't need to report that. Or so some will say, you don't need to report if you go to therapy if you're not diagnosed, like you just read. If there's no diagnoses, and this is what I do tell pilots who come into my direct messages. I say, if you've not been diagnosed with something and you go to therapy or seek help, I would not say anything about it. But in listening to the federal air surgeon, Susan Northrup, I've heard her say, if you do seek therapy, you need to report that. But then in writing, it doesn't say that. So that's why it's so hard for aviators, because they're getting different information from all angles. So I can't definitively say this is what you should or shouldn't do. But if I were an aviator, I would toe the line. So if they say you have a diagnosis, then I would only report if you have been diagnosed. Now, in the past, we've talked to pilots, and this has been 10 years ago, that have gone to marriage counseling, and it's been reported and they've had their medical pulled. But I think that we've come farther than that, and that if you go to marriage counseling or some type of counseling, that they're not going to dive into your medical records.
Well, I think this highlights the point that, as many of our listeners know, we work with Harvey Watt. There's other groups out there like AMAS that can provide consulting. But it seems like on a topic like this, getting clarity and getting advice from a third party, probably not the worst thing you can do.
Well, we've always said, too, if you have any sort of question about anything medically related, figure it out before you show up to apply for your medical and before you talk to the AME, and which is via third party. But it's easy to say,
sure,
if you have access to that stuff, where not everybody has access, but you just did a simple Google search and figured this out.
Yeah.
So on AMAS's website, right?
I think my point is, anybody on a podcast, you got to be careful with the stakes this high. I would be worried telling a pilot what to do or not to do, just like Maddie, says, hey, these are kind of the experiences, I can share them. But in my opinion, especially if you're a professional, seeking some type of third party would be is huge. And that
cheap insurance.
We like to say lawyer up.
in a way.
Where it does count, I think, and what we've seen a lot is where we have these people reporting in good faith reporting who may be having something very mild like marriage counseling. But what happens is, say you report something a year, 2 years ago, and for some reason your record happens to be investigated. Maybe you have some kind of safety infraction. Maybe it's not your fault, but they're still going to look at your record. If they see something like that and they want to connect the dots, therein lies kind of the trouble, and where we've seen people have their licenses revoked or pulled for things very, very mild, like marriage counseling, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about some of the success stories you've heard of pilots being able to seek help maybe outside of the traditional healthcare system. Are there folks that are providing counseling, life coaching, members of the church maybe? What are some other avenues that you've heard about people using, resources available?
There are a lot of resources available. Counseling, we had someone on our podcast, her name's Lindsay Costabel. She provides counseling for aviators who are going through struggles. And I think that's kind of a great place to go, because counselors can never diagnose you, for one. So you're never going to have to be like, okay, so I'm going to talk to you, but you can't diagnose me. Whereas if you go to someone who has the ability to diagnose, that's kind of what you're worried about. Because the first thing is like, you don't want to be diagnosed with anything. So I think counseling is a great route, but like at the same time, if you are suffering from depression and anxiety, I really do think going to therapy is something they should do. Other resources, obviously, you have your pilot peer support programs at the airlines, but like we've said, pilots are very scared to use those resources because they feel like those will come back on them, even though it's not recorded at all. We do have a pilot that will be on our podcast soon to talk kind of about the pilot peer support program, if she's allowed, if her union allows her to do it. But she said that she has helped a lot of people through that program, and she never knows who they are. So it is very confidential. They never keep any of the information. So if you're someone out there who's thinking of calling into pilot peer support and you're afraid of them keeping your information, it doesn't happen. And you probably will not talk to a pilot from your airline. So that's really good.
I don't know what this is, the pilot peer support. That's like you're calling another pilot.
It's a program. So if you were struggling as an airline pilot, and it may be called something else at other airlines, but it's a program where you can call in and you say, you know, you may be having a mental health issue. A lot of them were dealing with, I think, anxiety and depression, or feeling like they're having situational stress, basically. So they're calling in and asking for advice or just to talk to someone to rant. They don't even need you to talk, but that's kind of set up for airline pilots only. So student pilots don't really have that availability to
And this is
call.
through ALPA, through a union?
This is through ALPA union. Yeah.
Okay.
So multiple airlines will field those calls.
The obvious resources I think to point out there for general aviation, AOPA does have some really good resources. If you want to talk to a lawyer or something along those lines, if you're an AOPA member, I always kind of point people in that direction. But unfortunately, it's just like, what resource do you need? Because the resources are super limited right now, and we don't ever really know what the intentions of each resource is. Not that they have bad intentions, but we've seen a lot of people say the wrong things to certain people, and then it get them in a world of hurt. So I always tell people to play it safe. If you're really, really worried about your medical or going to speak to a medical professional and you're curious what you can and can't say, I think it's really, really good to take a gander at the FAA's website and really, really read that fine print, because that is what you need to know when you walk into that office.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is the biggest obstacle is everybody's afraid to do something because they don't necessarily know, and they think that the outcome could be bad. And I'm sure there's a segment of those people that could seek treatment and things would be okay. They just don't know that, so they don't because they're freaked out. And so one of the things we're big advocates for, and one of our sponsors in the show is Harvey Watt loss of medical insurance. That's to obviously insure you against the worst case. But part of that, they have an advising program as well. So you can just call and say, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. What should I do? How do I seek help that insulates me from a special issuance or problems with the FAA? Because there's multiple paths to solve any problem. And so maybe they can advise you to go down one that's going to help you not have issues with your medical, but also get you the help you need, as well as AMAS. And even if you have to pay for it, I think we've already established on the show that a pursuance of a special issuance is super time intensive without a medical, which one, if you're a professional pilot, is horrendously expensive because you are losing your source of income. But two, you also have to be writing checks, because we know somebody too that was in pursuit of a first-class medical and had taken depression medication, like, and diagnosed with depression like many years ago.
Well, we had a
And-
listener on the show in one of our first episodes where he, I think, was taking like Ritalin in high school.
Yeah,
And that
it's
came back
crazy.
to get him.
And,
So,
and
Yeah.
again, there's no record. Like, this just because they disclosed, which is they're trying to do what they're supposed to do and are being punished for it. But my point is, you can also go to Aeromedical Advisor System and you can just pay for a one-time like consultation. And the problem is a lot of times the generic healthcare provider doesn't know how an aeromedical system works. And that's the key, right? Your medical certificate is so fragile that you need to know what you don't know.
I like
Which
that you
means
guys
asking someone
touched
that
on
does.
the Harvey Watt situation because my husband bought Harvey Watt because of you guys.
Yeah.
Shout out Harvey Watt.
We still have Harvey Watt. I'm pretty sure my mom always tells me if anything ever happens, you got to call Harvey Watt. For the longest time, I thought Harvey Watt was a person.
yeah, he's like a rich relative. Just,
Yeah.
Harvey.
Whenever that would get brought up, I'm like, okay, this guy, Harvey, whatever,
When's
he
Harvey
deals
coming
with.
over for
Harvey.
dinner?
Yeah.
Harvey deals
he have
with
any
everything.
Yeah.
He knows what to do.
Why doesn't Uncle Harvey send me a Christmas card?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I just wanted to say that it is important to be prepared for those types of situations because I think we also haven't touched on, even if you are an airline pilot and you don't have any anxiety, depression, mental health struggles, there's no saying that you won't have it in your career at any time. So it is necessary to be prepared for if you do have loss of medical. And I think it is important to have insurance for that.
100%. Like we said, this job, even if you don't have many issues at home, for example, or anything else, just the nature of the job alone can be enough to really get people into a bad place. And I would say, especially this summer, I'm sure you experienced it, Maddie, with your husband. Pretty much every airline pilot I know this summer, they just called it the summer from hell. Everybody was working harder than they've ever had to work, being gone more than they've ever had to before, less flexibility in their schedule than ever before. And this was a really brutal year for a lot of professional pilots.
Yep. My husband, he just upgraded to captain. So he's on the reserve life and he is getting beat.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, people that we talk about that we always feel for is like at the big airline, you always have so many more resources. Like we have Harvey Watt insurance, so we have access to that. We have a contract with AMAS, so that's free. I can fill out the form, ask a question. It's so easy and there's so little barriers. And we have a program like they were talking about if you have mental health problems or concerns. There's so many, but if you're a corporate pilot,
General aviation pilot.
yeah, or a general aviation pilot, you're just kind of out there on your own. And so I think those are the people too that I'm most worried about that are like, what do I do? I don't want to call the dude that writes my medical because then I might be disclosing something I don't necessarily want to or need to be disclosing. As we saw, a lot of things people think they have to disclose, maybe they actually don't. So
When I mentioned that in our previous conversation with Jenny a couple episodes ago, I said the one thing that's different about business aviation for a lot of pilots, you're flying with the same pilot very frequently. And so one of the things that I think we can do in business aviation to help each other is, when you fly with another pilot all the time, you get used to how they operate, how their personality. And it's pretty easy, I've found, to detect when my co-star in the cockpit is feeling off for whatever reason. And so it can be a cross-check. Like I mentioned before, if you notice that the person that you're flying with, there's something going on, help them out a little bit and say, hey, it seems like, do you need to talk about something, or is there something that's on your mind right now or something like that? Even just to open the door for them, I think that is one benefit we have is we can see the same person operate over and over again versus the airline where you're going to be with somebody new every day potentially or every week. And maybe you're probably not going to have that close of a relationship to be able to talk to somebody in the cockpit. So,
yeah.
I think general aviation is who I worry about right now the most, not being able to get those resources that we get or you all get from like an airline per se. I do see a lot though, and the one thing that does shock me is there does seem to be a strong amount of camaraderie between captain and first officer. Some people are really, really, really willing to share their story or whatever they're going through with their co-pilot. And I feel like that's great, but we've also seen people that trauma dump on their co-workers. So it's like finding that fine line balance of ask people if they're okay, but do that at your own ability if that's something that you're comfortable with.
right. That's a really good point. Well, ladies, we just touched the surface of this conversation, and that's why I'm so excited that you guys have a podcast that devotes a lot of time to this conversation. There are no easy answers. I think that's kind of the thing that I walk away from this. Reform is needed. It's going to take a lot of different voices to be able to have input to help find the solution. So tell us a little bit about where we can find your show and for folks that are interested in hearing a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so we are streaming on about every single platform that you can find a podcast on. So Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, etc. The list goes on. And you can find us on Instagram at the Pilots Pandemic. And we do most of our information. And if you want to get up with us, that is the way to do it. My personal is M Neon Icon. Don't ask me why that is. That's my @name. I'll send all that to you. You guys can put it in the bio. But yeah, all of our resources for the petition and everything, like if you go to my personal Instagram, I have all those links in my bio. Same with the podcast page. If you go up there, we have a whole website dedicated to this stuff.
Awesome. Well, we all like to complain about this problem, but you guys are actually doing something about it.
Yep.
So we commend you. Thank you. And I think a call to action for our listeners to at least sign the petition. That's probably the best thing we can do to help you guys with this, right? To then show it to the congressional leaders and people that can actually do something.
Thank you. And then follow Maddie. She's at the Fit Aviatrix. Maddie has dedicated, that's why I brought her onto the show. She has dedicated so much of her time to spreading awareness about reform. So if you want even more content, go to her page. She is doing the best stuff over there. So give her a follow as well. And if you can, please sign the petition. We really appreciate everyone's support.
Great. We will have links to all of that in the show notes for this episode. We look forward to seeing all of the great work that you guys are doing. All the episodes you're putting out, I know I'm certainly going to be tuning in. Thank you so much for coming on the show, ladies. And we look forward to you coming back, telling us about
updates.
Your victories.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully.
We would love to. Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I have some interesting videos to share with our listeners about what we were up to last week.
Doing what?
At the lake. A new type of wing aviation. You want to tell people what we tried?
Yeah, we got a foil board. If you guys don't know what that is, it's like a wake surfing board, but then it has a mast beneath it and a wing and a tail. And it basically works like an airplane where the wing lifts you up, and as you lean back, you increase the angle of attack underwater, and it elevates you out of the water, and then the tail kind of keeps everything from toppling over.
Remember the air chair people used to pull behind the boat? It's
Right.
kind of like a surfboard with an air chair bottom.
Very challenging.
Listen.
For people that are well-versed in board sports, still very challenging.
Well, I might stick to the airfoil. The hydrofoils, it's a lot of work, but it's a fun new challenge. Wings-wise, what else? I got some updates for you. My kids have been patiently waiting. As you know, they're become huge aviation fans. So we've been flying the demo of X-Plane, and the new version of X-Plane came out. And so we finally bought it. So I bought my son a joystick, with a throttle and rudder. I'm like, all right, this is cool. I'm going to teach him some of the basics. We'll get in the, 172 and go around the pattern and try it. No, they don't want anything to do with that. They, of course, go straight to their beloved A380. And we spent all day Sunday going through the Grand Canyon at full throttle in an A380. It's actually pretty fun. I posted a couple videos on the socials.
Listen, the amount of time you guys I'm going to be very disappointed when I take your son for his birthday was last month, and I got him a flight. I told him I'd take him on a flight with whoever he wanted to go with in the plane. Actually, you got cut. I forgot to tell you.
Oh, did I really?
I'm like, all right, Gab, we have 6 seats, and I have to be there to fly, and you, so that leaves 4 people. I go, who do you want to come? He goes, the cousins, which are my 3 boys. I said, okay. Well, we got 1 seat left. He goes, Graham. I said, well, now we're not going to be able to bring your dad. He goes, oh, he can come if one of the cousins don't want to come. So you're not even coming.
I'm on the standby list.
But I'm going to be pissed if he gets in there and can't fly at all.
Listen, go to the Grand Canyon. He went through Horseshoe Bend. If our listeners know Horseshoe Bend's this pretty sharp little turn in the Colorado River there in a P-51 at full throttle. It's pretty impressive. So we're not paid to say this, but go download the X-Plane demo. It's pretty fun. Anyways, that's the update from around here, Parent Corner check-in. All right, episode 84. We're getting closer and closer to 100, my man. Speaking of numbers, did you know we recently eclipsed over 200,000 downloads? We're almost to 250,000 now.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Boom. Yeah.
How much time is that? Think about that. 200,000 downloads, okay?
Uh-huh.
And what would you say our average episode length is?
An hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
maybe,
That's
yeah.
what I was going to say. So some quick mental math here. That's 300,000 hours divided by 24. That's 12,500 days of people's time they've spent listening to this show.
Unbelievable. I hope some folks are getting some value out of it, or at least some entertainment.
34 and a quarter years of time people have spent listening to this show.
Thank you. Thank you to all our listeners who
Your
have...
perspective was Batiste.
Yeah.
Today's perspective.
That's right. Wow. That's amazing. Well, thanks to all our listeners. Thanks to Maddie and Emma, Pilots Pandemic Podcast, for joining us. Advanced Aircrew Academy, Harvey Watt, and Timothy P. Pope, our financial partners in this show.
Thank you to Donovan Batiste
Let it slide up off the ground. We in ground effect, baby.
for shaping the minds of tomorrow's aviators.
That's right.
Boom.
AWAS! Bang! We'll be back in a couple of weeks for another episode. But until then, remember...
Pull that thing back.
Let it do what it do, baby.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.